I was born in Dallas. My folks worked in the woods, and so I lived up by Valset's for 6 months, and then they moved into town where I'm living now, and I've lived there ever since. I did go off to college and some other stuff, but I've always came back to Fall City. I don't know if you ever heard of the Tillamook burns. They were some of the biggest fires in that day and age. And in '49, as I was being born, my dad was home soaking our house and stuff with water because the flames had come up to Rick Rial Ridge, that's the next one over from us, and was starting to creep over the top of it. Fortunately, it didn't make it any further. You know, in my mind, I can see and feel the energy that these men and women had and the determination, you know, that no, that fire can come, but it won't get us. When my dad and mom got married and they moved here, my mom was called a squaw. So my mom was raised in Siletz on the reservation down there. And I can tell you one thing, people called my mom squaw once when my dad was around. And he'd say, that's it. You don't say that word to my wife or you're gonna regret it, you know? And he wasn't a big man, but he was extremely physically fit. And I think he could have beat the, you know what, out of almost anybody, and he would have, you know, because my mother and him, you know, is one of those relationships. And I hear this still about my folks is, oh my gosh, I sure liked Art and Betty. You know, they were just everywhere in town, doing this, doing that. They were always happy. They were definitely big protagonists for you live in a community, you owe that community something, you know. Otherwise, you don't have a community. And that definitely stuck in my head. My dad continued to work in the woods. And, he was injured twice very severely. My first memories of my dad was he was in a full body cast. You know, he didn't have much to do, so he would set me on his lap and he taught me to read real early. You know, I can remember reading to him about the Korean War and stuff like that in the early 50s. By the time I was in first grade, the teacher, you know, or she said, you know, you help the other students because, you know, you can read. Then he recovered from that, you know, one of those stories where they tell you you'll never walk again, you'll never do this again or whatever. A couple years later, he was working in the woods again, another horrific accident, another full body cast and stuff. So after that, he went to work in Dallas as a pond monkey, you know, a guy that working on the pond, shoving the logs around to where the saws are and stuff to get them cut and things. Planer Mill was down here where, like I say, Green Haven is. That whole flat area in there was all taken up with the planer mill. And again, at the planer mill, they took the raw cut 2x4s and everything, and they planed them down to a smooth, you know, all the sides are smooth, and they stacked them down there for a while, and then they were shipped out of town, either on the railroad, which used to come down over through that area of town, and then it crossed Perry Road just above the falls there, and then went on up to Black Rock and stuff. So there was still quite a bit of train use. Again, as a little kid, it was just fascinating to be around this machinery. We would cut through the parking lot, which the people didn't like a lot because there was jitneys and stuff running around and other stuff going on. But I mean, you know, you just dodge those things as kids. Yeah, it was great. It was great being raised here. Right after school, I got some scholarships and stuff. Went down to OSU. Had no idea what I wanted to do. I still don't. But I've always loved to read, and I've always been fascinated with history. I got hooked up with Asian philosophy, history, religion, whatever. And I just went, wow, this is so similar in many thoughts to native beliefs. You know, it's just like my forefathers or whatever said. You know, I just go, wow, this is so cool. And so I spent 4 years reading and having some fun and stuff, and graduated and said, oh, I'm going back home. Came back here. Buddy says, hey, you need a job? I say, yeah, sure. Okay, here, you're going to be a tree planter. I had no idea what a tree planter was. I learned fast and stuff, so it's a job that you're outside. You get to travel a lot. We'd go all over the Pacific Northwest and stuff with that. Went to Canada and Alaska to plant trees. You've heard of Valsets. Well, they destroyed the town. They drained the pond. We replanted the whole pond area up there, the whole town with trees. I've planted trees all over the Rick Rial Ridge, out by Grand Round. My motivation always was my dad cut down trees, so I was going to put them back. And then the firm also got into wildland firefighting, and that really expanded the horizons of where you went. Fire's not an enemy, but fire does need to be controlled, or it can become an enemy. So you just go, okay, we want to be friends with this. How do we do it? Sometimes it's not digging big fire lines and stuff. Sometimes it is just that back burning, Okay, we're going to literally fight fire with fire. And that's one thing the natives people they were so used to using fire as a tool, and again, just being at the powwows, being around, my mom's side of the family, they were all Indians, and they knew this stuff. And some of what my dad said, we are defending something, and because fire can kill. Okay, we all think we're going to live forever. Well, excuse me, it's not going to happen. Not in this form. We have something to do now, and that's to be good people. I bought a place, not too far from my folks' house, and I could be here checking in with them all the time, and also I could get out and have my fun. For some reason, I really like this little town and saw no reason to have to go anywhere else to be happy or anything. A lot of people go, how could you do that? How could you just stay there? I said, I'm happy. I don't know what you want out of life, but I'm not searching for money, any of that other stuff. I want to be there for my folks. I want to be happy. And this worked out for me.